Hello, vinyl community. Mazzy here. This is a thread about soundtracks. I'm showcasing some of my favorite soundtracks. It's a thread started by Beth at B-Side Records, who is all things soundtracks. If you want to know anything about soundtracks, the good, bad, and the ugly of soundtracks, check her out. I'll put a link below. And she started this thread with 10 questions. And in typical Mazzy fashion, I'm going to improvise a little bit. I love soundtracks. Vinyl, I have a nice selection. CDs, I have a lot more. I'm not going to show CDs except in the background right now. I'm playing volume 2 of these wonderful 2 CD volumes of Danny Elfman music. If you don't know Danny Elfman, you should. He was an original member of the band, LA band, art new wave band Oingo Boingo, and has done so many amazing soundtracks for the likes of Tim Burton films, from the Batman movies on to the surrealistic films, Nightmare Before Christmas, Big Top Pee Wee Herman movies, which is actually Tim Burton as well, Scrooged, Alfred Hitchcock Presents a TV Show, The Simpsons. Anyway, so many things. Beautiful, ethereal, just make you feel good music. And some of his stuff can be very ominous as well. And if you don't know, he was the vocalist as Jack Skellington. So that's in the background now. So I'm going to go through these questions and we'll see how this goes. I'd like to do another one of these days, because I have a ton of CD soundtracks and I think it'd be fun to go through those, not a part of this thread. So, of course, okay, number 1, the first soundtrack you ever bought. Well, it wasn't because it was a soundtrack, yet it was a soundtrack, and it's an obvious one for me, and I decided to stick with it even though it was gonna go off base. But I'm gonna show the first 2, which is A Hard Day's Night. The American version actually is a soundtrack more than the UK albums of the same title, because those were actual albums by the band. The American versions, which I love, the United Artists record, and then Help on Capitol the following years, 1964 and 1965, which has extended instrumental pieces. Obviously on this one, George Martin wrote, from Ringo's theme to instrumental versions of their songs that George Martin orchestrated and arranged. And then this one, which is musical score by Ken Thorne, and I think there was a bit of a rivalry from going from George Martin to Ken Thorne in this. However, I will say one thing about this. I love the soundtrack version, and honestly, it was that Beatles film that turned me on to Beethoven, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and Wagner, Prelude to Lohengrin, Act 3. So classical music is a part of that, and I think it's transplendent how it worked in there. And then I'm going to show one of my all-time favorite soundtracks, which was probably the first non-Beatles soundtrack I ever bought, and I played this to death. I still do. In fact, I played it yesterday. Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey, 1968, one of my all-time favorite films, one of my all-time favorite directors. Interesting thing about this, he had a composer, his name is escaping me right now, but one of you smart people is going to write his name, and I actually have a CD of the original score. Kubrick sent the rough cut to the composer who scored the entire movie. When the preview showed, it turned out everything that composer wrote at the screening, at the preview, at the premiere, none of it was used in the motion picture. Kubrick ended up using all the temporary music that he used. Everything from Richard Strauss, the German composer who wrote also Sprach Zarathustra, which has become you can't hear that without thinking of 2001. That's the opening, amazing, majestic intro and the outro to the movie. Plus, Ligeti, there's a lot of avant-garde classical modernist music in here that's really out there, and it got me into this type of music early on when I was 13, 14 when this album came out, when this movie came out. So I played this record to death, and it was unusual when you think about it. 1968, someone into the Beatles, into rock and roll and psychedelia, just falling in love with this kind of stuff. And most of my friends liked it too. Obviously, the Blue Danube is on here by the other Strauss, different Strauss than the one who wrote also Sprach Zarathustra. Atmospheres. Anyway, just a great, great album. A beautiful collection of classical music. The newest soundtrack in your collection, I'm going to do two. One is this one, which I think is just stunningly beautiful, is a soundtrack to The Joker. The woman who wrote it is Hildur Guðnadóttir. I know I screwed up that pronunciation, and she won Best Soundtrack and Academy Award for this movie. Such a beautiful, beautiful score. I love that. And the other one I'm going to show, because I'm a big fan, first of all, I'm a fan of Daniel Day-Lewis. I'm a fan of this movie, Phantom Thread. Didn't get a lot of love in certain areas, but I think it's an amazing movie. It's a great send-off for Daniel Day-Lewis. It's dark, it's funny, it's gorgeous, and the soundtrack is just really, really beautiful. And it has inside it a book. The Johnny Greenwood, who wrote the score, is a member of the guitar player for Radiohead, and it's a very classical piece of music. But I just love this music. Paul Thomas Anderson directed the film. He also did There Will Be Blood soundtrack, same director, same actor. But this is a stunningly beautiful, and I'm going out of order here, but I would recommend this. In fact, all these records I'm showing you, all these soundtracks, I'm recommending heavily to you all. Okay, the one you listen to most, well, kind of all these, but two of them off the top of my head again is this Clockwork Orange soundtrack, mostly Wendy Carlos, not all Wendy Carlos, who composed Switched on Bach. I think Wendy was Walter Carlos when she worked on this, a fabulous soundtrack, Moog synthesizer, but it has the William Tell Overture, again the Ninth Symphony from Beethoven, one of my favorites that keeps cropping up on so many films. I mean, think of it, Clockwork Orange, Help, Die Hard, many, many more films. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is my all-time favorite. As a cliche as it sounds, classical piece of music. Just a beautiful piece. The other one is this. It's Blow Up, one of my all-time favorite films, directed by Michelangelo Antonioni. It's an arty film about photography from 1966. It's loosely based on the photographer, the British photographer David Bailey, who was a celebrity photographer, photographed the Beatles. There's a connection. Among other people. Soundtrack composed by Herbie Hancock. It's got a really kind of great 60s swinging London vibe. It's got a great cut. The Yardbirds are on here. And in fact, the Yardbirds are in the club scene in the film. So it's a great early Yardbirds film. You can see them on film. It's the Yardbirds with Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page, and just really, really great. But I love this soundtrack. I think these are two soundtracks everyone should own. So as I go out of order. Okay, favorite composers. There's a lot. I mean, there's so many great film composers. Two off the top of my head I think are just amazing. One is the great Bernard Herrmann. A lot of Hollywood scores, a lot of Hitchcock films. This one especially, Vertigo. I highly suggest this Vertigo. Bernard Herrmann's Psycho. So most of the the 60s films by Hitchcock were scored by Bernard Herrmann. The other one who I really love is Nino Rota. Nino Rota did most of the Fellini films. I'm not sure if he did all of them. This is a soundtrack to Fellini's La Dolce Vita. Great, great film. Again, I'm a cinemaphile. I'm into European films, the French New Wave, the British films, obviously Fellini and Ingmar Bergman and Truffaut. I just love that stuff. So kind of going through this pretty fast. Okay, favorite instrumental score. I could pick any of these, but for the sake of this video, there's a mood to these records that I just love. And that is Angelo Badalamenti. Angelo Badalamenti became famous, at least to me, to doing all the soundtracks for Twin Peaks. That great guitar bit of the theme from Twin Peaks. So I follow all the different variations. Actually, this is a This is different because this is sort of rock, kind of dirgy rock song. So this probably wouldn't count in there for scores. But there's so many different variations of the Twin Peaks, the Fire Walk With Me movie, the Twin Peaks limited TV series that was on Showtime, as well as pretty much all the later David Lynch movies that Angelo Badalamenti scored. Really beautiful, has a really kind of, sound that just is perfect for David Lynch. Love that stuff, love putting this on. There is, I don't know if it's still available, I did download it, I think it was like $40 maybe. All the score and all the cues, if you know what movie cues are, the little bits, sometimes they're a 10-second cue, music cue, sometimes they're 20, 30 seconds, and you can get those from all the David Lynch films at the David Lynch site, and it was like $40 for hours of music, so it's something to check out too. So, down, down, down. All right, awesome movie and horrible soundtrack. I'm not doing that. I'm skipping that one because, I don't know, I just am. Soundtrack that is better than the movie. Okay, I can do that one. It is an interesting movie. It's surrealistic, and that is Zabriskie Point. Zabriskie Point, somewhat surreal, somewhat a film of its time. Oh my God, this is the extended version. Again, oh my God, let's see, what can I say about this film? It's Antonioni, again, who did Blow Up. Zabriskie Point had a lot of rock and roll stuff in it. And what I really like is Pink Floyd had done like almost back-to-back films. They did Obscured by... Sorry, there's a little interruption there. Pink Floyd did Obscured by Clouds, and then they did a lot of score for this movie. The movie is problematic. It's interesting. It's a movie of its time, surreal, like it's one of those what the fuck movies. Some great bits, but kind of a cinema of the late 60s. It was in 1969, I believe, I think. But the soundtrack is amazing, especially the expanded edition, which you can maybe still find on vinyl. Pink Floyd jammy stuff, excerpt from the Grateful Dead's Dark Star. It's got Patti Page doing Tennessee Waltz and the Youngbloods doing Sugar Babe. Love seeing guitar stuff by Jerry Garcia, John Fahey, Dance of Death. And then the second disc has all this love scene improvising from Jerry Garcia on guitar and more Pink Floyd. An amazing soundtrack, an amazing score, but problematic film. Interesting if you're a child of cinema or a fan of cinema on an artistic level, but ultimately not very satisfying. But this is an amazing listen. Another, let's see, song by your favorite artist band featured in a soundtrack. You know, I forgot to do it here. I just did a Dylan thing. I'm gonna say Things Have Changed by Bob Dylan. He won an Oscar for, or a Grammy, or maybe both, for The Wonder Boys with Michael Douglas. Things Have Changed. I don't have it here, unfortunately. Wonder Boys, I have it on CD, but Things Have Changed is a song from a soundtrack. Share a soundtrack you think everyone should own. Well, I'm gonna close out. There's a Grail Wants thing. I don't think I have a Grail Wants because I pretty much get what I, soundtrack-wise. I have to think about that, so I'm gonna skip that one. But these last ones, I think, are amazing soundtracks, and I think everyone should have these. They're amongst my favorite, in addition to everything I just showed you. So this whole video contains some of my favorite soundtracks. To me, one of the greatest themes of any motion picture is this. This is from the David Lean film, Lawrence of Arabia. Maurice Jarre, one of the great film composers of the 60s and 70s. His son is Jean-Michel Jarre, who did albums like Oxygen and got a little more electronic, did some soundtracks as well. The theme alone, you've all heard it. If you haven't, go listen to it right now. But Lawrence of Arabia, an amazing soundtrack. John Barry, one of the foremost also of American composers and arrangers and sound and recording for Goldfinger. Is he British? Maybe he's British. I should have checked that. I don't know. Obviously, we all know the great Shirley Bassey song, Goldfinger. That was produced by George Martin in England, but what a great score. The soundtrack to Goldfinger, United Artists Records. Great movie, one of the best James Bond movies with Sean Connery, and a great score. Two different versions of this. This to me is a perfect soundtrack and a great film. It won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, I think in 1959. And it's Black Orpheus, Brazilian. It's got a little dialogue, but mostly this beautiful music. It's almost like a Romeo and Juliet film, and it's just some tragedy in it, but a gorgeous film, one of the great films I'd say of all time, and a great soundtrack. Black Orpheus. There's also an album that's not a soundtrack, but Vince Guaraldi, the great West Coast jazz piano player who does, you probably know him by the Snoopy and Peanuts soundtrack. There's, I think, an album called, I'm blanking on the exact name, I'm paraphrasing, but Impressions of Black Orpheus, where he does Cast Your Fate to the Wind and all these other songs, and he kind of improvises. But these are incredible records, as far as I'm concerned. If you like sort of world music, I mean, everything is world music, right? But great records. Also, probably my favorite score of any Woody Allen movie. Woody Allen uses found music, and what I mean is almost like stock, existing music for the most part. Several of his films have been scored, but I just love George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue, and the entire side one of this is Rhapsody in Blue. One of the best openings of any motion picture, when Woody Allen does the voiceover at the beginning of this, where he's typing his love letter to New York, to Manhattan, and he just keeps stopping and starting over. And the way this movie bursts out of the speakers on this film, and especially when a full orchestra comes in and the fireworks in black and white are over New York City, is just gorgeous. I love this record. It's one I play a lot. I mean, side two has some jazzy pieces and things that just, so wonderful and Gershwin-y or Cole Porter type sounds, but beautiful soundtrack. And then lastly, this is my last list. This is a great record and a great film, and this is Diva. This is from the late 1980s. It's a German film, I believe. Operatic, gorgeous, sort of punk opera in a way, in terms of this love and this mystery and a little bit of violence, but is it German? Yeah, it's German, right? Diva, or French. I'm sorry, it's French. I'm sorry, you Frenchmen and you German people. I'm not mixing you up. I haven't watched it in a while. I need to watch this record again, but the soundtrack is a gorgeous soundtrack. So that's my intro, or my overview tag for Beth Records, B-Side Records, of soundtracks, 10 questions in my way. All great soundtracks. I love this music, and I suggest any of you check out all these records. Mazzy loves you. Take care.